This past year has been unlike any other in many ways, and in one particular way for me. It has been a year of death with no funerals. 3 people from our church have died, but there haven't been any funerals due to the pandemic. And funerals are an enormous part of my life as the pastor of this church. It might sound odd to you, those of you who don't go to a lot of funerals, but I love funerals. Funerals are one of the things I love most about my job. They bring me right into the vibrant heart of the human experience, right into the core of individual lives where I understand the theology of incarnation so clearly. Holiness in a human body. And this brings so much richness to my life that I treasure, and I don't think I would have if I wasn't a pastor. There are 2 things I appreciate the most about funerals. The first is simple. Funerals are one of the very few places in human life where everyone gets together and everyone is absolutely clear why we are together. We come to mourn, we come to support, and we come to celebrate. And because everyone who comes is on the same page, if I do what I do well, then everyone gets to leave having experienced exactly what they came for. And that's a marvelous thing to me. The second thing I love most about funerals are the stories. And they're usually quite ordinary, everyday stories, something that this person did day in and day out, all the days of their life. The things that person did that made others' lives richer. A quality of a laugh or a smile, a delight in family or food or fun, a special place, a way of being, a kindness, maybe some song. You know, the very things that tend to rush by all of us in their ordinariness for much of the days of our lives. But for this 1 hour when we're gathered in this place, the details and the memories and the impressions and the impact of the living of those stories are frozen in time for the gathered beloved. And we stand here and we say, this was what was so very especially good about this life. This is what we loved the most. This is what we will miss the most. This was love in this instance. Now, as a theologian, I'm a person who talks about God. And the basic premise of everything I think and talk about is quite simple. 3 words. God is love. And all I've ever done with the 1,000 sermons I've preached over the years is say that God is love, and love is God in 1,000 different ways. And so these funeral moments and memories are moments when God just jumped off the pages of people's lives. Snapshots, if you will, of the living God. And when they jump off the pages of those lives, they are written in the book of my life. And for these past 9 months, I've missed the stories. The brilliant flashes of God dignifying and adorning these lives. The ordinary infused with the holy. I often go home from funerals feeling like I've been at a revival meeting. because the experience of listening to these stories inspires me, because I see in the faces of the people gathered inspiration. Their eyes are wide open, and they say to themselves, this was a very good life indeed. Our love was lovely. And I think to myself as a pastor, imagine if all of us would leave a funeral transformed, having shared and heard and remembered all the things that had us laughing and crying and nodding our heads in agreement, the things that how this person's life made a difference will now make all the difference in our lives. That we would leave intending and empowered to carry that loved goodness forward into the world, to live the quality of that laugh or smile or hug, to emulate that delight in family and friends, to share with the world that essence. In a word, to take the good that was planted in our life by that person and help it to bear fruit. Sadly, the human experience seems to me often to be somewhat tragic, in that most of us inherit unconsciously from our parents and their parents and the place where we grew up the things that we ultimately like least about ourselves, the ways of thinking and behaving that make our lives and our relationships less loving than we might wish, more difficult than they need be. People will say, he has his father's temper. He has his mother's distrust. He's as stubborn as his grandfather. He is as bitter or jealous as his grandmother. In short, my friends, we go through life living someone else's pains and struggles and have them as our own, when through the practice of faith, we can notice what's going on and let go and wake up. When we see ourselves doing or saying something and say, ah, yes, that's my father, not me. Ah, that's my mother, not me. I don't need to live my grandparents' fears and angers and prejudices anymore. How nice it would be, I think, if instead of living our ancestors' dysfunction, we commit ourselves to live their sweetness, to pass on their grace and love and gentleness and wisdom and humor. All the things we lift up at a funeral. You see, the ordinary is oh so very extraordinary if you live it on purpose. That would be a life worth living. After my mother died, I remember sitting at the supper table with our sons, and they were asking me questions about life and death and heaven, and what now for Grandma? And I was answering the questions as we ate, and I remember this one moment with absolute clarity. Leo turned to me with a look of unease on his face and asked, "So Grandma can hear everything we say?" And I knew it was too good to let go. So I said, yes. Yes, she can. And she tells me everything she hears. And they paused for this wide-eyed moment, and then we all started laughing. But you know, our modern Western culture is the only culture in the history of the entire human story that believes that when someone dies, they're just dead and gone. That the relationship is over, that something has become nothing, that someone has become no one. I pity us because everyone else in the entire history of the world, from the beginning of time until now, believed ever so strongly in the continued presence and power of ancestors and friends and neighbors and husbands and wives and children and aunts and uncles, believed in their guidance and grace, their blessing and being. Imagine on this All Saints Sunday, if we believed what I invited my boys to believe, that our dearly departed are right here and that we should behave accordingly, that we transform their death into the fullness of our lives. At the very end of the Steven Spielberg movie, Saving Private Ryan, we see the now elderly James Ryan collapsing at the Omaha Beach Cemetery in Normandy. He's at the grave of Captain Miller, the man who died leading the men who would save his life in June of 1944. He's surrounded by his wife and grown children and grandchildren. And we see Ryan touching Miller's gravestone and speaking to the spirit of Captain Miller, saying, "I've tried to live the promise you asked of me before you died. Earn this. Earn the life that they gave so that he might live." And he turns to his wife for confirmation. "Tell me I've led a good life. Tell me I'm a good man." That, my friends, is a life lived in the presence of our saints, living a life worthy of the very best of life that they gave to us. Amen.